Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Richardson. I'm going to be helping you all learn trigonometry this term. I'm really excited to introduce all of these ideas to you because trigonometry is fundamental to a ton of the mathematics that you're going to see later. But we'll take it slow. We got lots of weeks to work on this. Let's start with just a little bit of an introduction. We'll talk a little bit about how the class will go, and then some big ideas and big questions that you should be asking throughout the course. All right? So let me go ahead and pull up some slides. You can find these slides on Canvas as well, so you can always follow along. I'll post these lectures as I record them, but let's get started. So here's an overview. Today we're going to talk about the orientation module, which you can find on Canvas, the lecture videos and the slides, which you're watching right now and looking at right now, the MyLab math homework, which is where all the homework for the course will be, then we'll talk about Proctorio, the proctoring service that we use for this online course. We'll talk about Gradescope, which is where you're going to upload your exams. And then after that, we'll get to some content. So we'll talk about some big questions that you should be asking, really for any class, but in particular this class and math classes in general. Then we'll talk about some big ideas about math that you should have. And then we're going to finish up today talking a little bit about how to solve problems or techniques that we have used to solve problems in the past that may not be the best techniques. All right, so when you log on to Canvas, there should be a module at the top of the screen that's the orientation module. You want to make sure you go through that in its entirety as soon as you possibly can. So try to do that this first week, the first day or two if you can. It has all of the important info that you need, and you should read it and go through all of that. If you've got a question, make sure to check the module first because the answer might be there, or you can check the syllabus. The answer might be there as well. There's a practice proctorio quiz that's due the first week. Make sure you take that this week. That's going to basically expose you to what proctorio is like. It'll show you what to do if you get kicked out of an exam when you're taking the exam because you can get back in. So make sure you take that this week. All right, so the lecture videos and the slides. The lecture videos will be posted each week. I'm going to try to keep up as best I can. I have a couple recorded, but I'm going to try to record them each week as we go along and make changes as I go along as well. So how do you actually watch these videos? Well, one thing that I like to do in the videos is I like to include these Dora moments. So I don't know if you've ever seen the show Dora the Explorer, but there are these moments during the show where she will kind of pause and look lovingly at the camera and wait for you to interact with her essentially. So I include some of those moments in the lectures. And what I'll do is I'll usually throw up an image like this, for example, where I'll throw up the little thinking face. And what you should do is just take a few minutes to think about what's being said or think about the question that's being asked. Then sometimes what I'll do is I'll throw up this icon as well. This is the speaking icon. And what I want you to do is I want you to actually say something out loud. It doesn't have to be to anybody. It doesn't have to be to anybody, but a lot of times when we say things out loud, our brain learns better from that feedback process. So it doesn't matter if you're just talking to the wall or to your dog or your cat or your kids or whatever, but I'll throw up this icon sometimes, and what I want you to do is just say something out loud about what you're thinking about, and that'll help you make better sense of these ideas. All right. The other thing I wanted to say is that you really should be reading the textbook. The slides and the lectures are a really good companion to them, and I try to compress things in a more concise way with the lectures and the slides. But because this is a fully online asynchronous course, you should expect to be reading the textbook as we go along. I recommend reading it in advance. I know a lot of students will ask me, what can I do to improve my grade, or what can I do to be more successful in my classes? And the number one thing you can do is to read the book in advance. So for example, we're going to be covering sections 5.1 and 1.5 pretty soon. You could read those sections before you watch the lectures, before you look at the slides. Read those sections of the book, just at least skim them. See if you can kind of make sense of them, then go watch the lectures, look at the slides, and then do the homework. And that's really what will lead you to the most success, honestly. Once I started doing that, that turned me from a C student into an A student. So I always recommend that. And yes, also read the slides, watch the lectures, do all of those things. All right, so the homework in this course is entirely online. It's through a product called MyLab Math or MyLab and Mastering. The company that produced it is called Pearson. So that's the company overseeing all of the software. All the homework is on that platform. You should keep pace. So one of the difficulties I found when I would take online courses is that, I would try to wait and put the homework off until the last minute, and it always came back to bite me really badly. So the second bit of advice I can give you is to keep pace. We're going to cover about 2 sections a week. Is it 2 sections? Yeah, we're going to cover about 2 sections a week. So once you've looked through that section of the textbook and watched the lectures and looked at the slides, you should start the homework immediately as well and try to complete that homework as we go along. Don't put it all off. Don't put it off until the last minute. It's going to be due weekly, so it's always due on Sunday nights. But try to complete the first homework set earlier in the week so that you have time to complete the second homework set later on in the week. One of the nice things about my math lab is that you'll get multiple tries and you'll get feedback. So if you enter your answer to a question and it's incorrect, you can try again, and you can try again, and you can try again. And if I remember, I think you get about 8 tries per problem, but I can't remember exactly. But you get multiple tries, and it will let you know if you're wrong, and it'll let you know if you're right. So that's one of the nice things about this type of software. Um, you can review homework questions. So this is another thing that students often ask me. Once you've completed a homework assignment, you can still go back and review those problems, and you can even kind of do the whole homework assignment over again. So see the orientation module for instructions on how to do that, and I can help you figure that out as well. All right. There's also going to be some quizzes on MyLab Math. Right now, I think I have 4 scheduled. Quizzes won't occur on exam weeks, but if I remember correctly, they're pretty much in between the exam weeks. So we've got 4 right now, and you can basically expect to take a quiz every other week. That's a safe bet. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about Proctorio. So Proctorio is an online proctoring software that we use. Again, see the orientation module for complete details. There's an entire section there about Proctorio, how to set it up, how to use it. And like I had mentioned earlier, you want to take the practice Proctorio quiz in week 1. And that's going to expose you to what it's like to take Proctorio, or I'm sorry, to use Proctorio, what it's like to take an exam. It'll lead you through how to upload your work and so on and so on. But one thing I'll say is you should be prepared to troubleshoot tech issues. So this is an online class and it's asynchronous. So you should expect to have to deal with technology a lot. So the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to get into an exam and then realize that there's all of these issues that you have to work through during the exam, tech issues like, like the camera is not picking me up, or my microphone is not reading correctly. I can't access the exam for some reason. I haven't logged into Gradescope yet, so I can't upload to Gradescope. All of these issues, you want to be prepared to have to troubleshoot them, preferably before you even get into the exam. And that's one of the reasons we have this practice Proctorio quiz, just to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. Okay. So one thing about Proctorio is you will need to install a Chrome extension, and you will need to use Chrome when you take an exam in this class. You cannot use another browser, so you cannot use Safari, you can't use Firefox, you must use Chrome. So make sure you're using Chrome, and you'll have to download the extension for Proctorio and install it on Chrome. Instructions for how to do that are in the orientation module. One thing I also want to emphasize, and I know I mentioned this in the introduction email, is that you will be recorded during exams. So for the exam, you will have to be on camera with your microphone on, and a recording will be made of you while you take the exam. You're also going to have to scan the room where you're taking the exam before you start it. Again, all of these details are in the orientation module, and you'll get to practice it, because I know it's very overwhelming and it's very weird. Like, oh man, how am I going to remember all these details? Um, you'll see. You'll see when you do the practice quiz and when you read through the stuff in the orientation module. So The way that exams will go is essentially you will open the exam on Canvas and Proctorio will start. You'll be able to download the questions from Canvas and you're going to write your work on paper. You're going to write your work on paper. And then when you're done, you're going to upload your work to another website called Gradescope, which I'll talk about in a minute. And you're going to do that using your phone. So they have an app, Gradescope has an app, or you can just go to the website on your phone. Either way, either one will work. Then you'll do all your work on paper. You're going to take photos of your work with your phone. Doesn't have to be a PDF or anything like that. Just take photos of it, upload it to Gradescope, and then once you've done that, you're going to turn your phone to the camera and basically show something like this, where you'll say, okay, look, I just took the exam and Gradescope is showing me that I did take the exam, and I'm showing you that I just took the exam. And once you've done that, you can then click on Submit Quiz on Canvas, and that will submit your quiz and it will exit Proctorio. That's how it goes. Another thing I want to emphasize here is your phone must be put away during the exam. So you're not allowed to just like have your phone chilling in front of you while you're taking the exam. It's got to be put away. But once you have finished your work, you can get your phone out, take photos of it, upload it to Gradescope, and everything should work out really well. And if you have questions, remember you can always email me and I'll get back to you ASAP. And you can ask on the discussion forums that we have on Canvas. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Gradescope. So Gradescope is an online assessment platform, and it actually makes submitting your work and getting feedback back to you really, really simple. That's one of the reasons I like using it. I've been using it for about 3 years now. And it's a very nice tool. It's a very nice tool. It's free, so you don't need to purchase it or anything. And you should have gotten an email already from Gradescope that says log into Gradescope and set up an account. I think I say that on here, right? Yeah, there, yeah, exactly. So you should have already received, hold on, there we go. Yeah, you should have already received an invite from Gradescope because our Canvas roster and the Gradescope roster is synced. They're synced together. So there's no access code or anything like that. You just have to go to your student email, your SMC student email, and there will be an email from Gradescope. One thing I'll emphasize, check your spam folder. It's probably in your spam folder. So if you don't see it in your inbox, check your spam folder because, Gradescope sounds like a very spammy name. So there's a good chance that it's just in your spam folder, but it is there. It is there, I promise. Um, and like I had mentioned briefly, all the feedback and point assignments on exams will be given on Gradescope. So when I grade the exams, I'll grade them on Gradescope and then I'll release the feedback and you can go and you can see precisely why you got points, why points were deducted. I'll leave comments and feedback. You'll be able to see statistics for the questions, for the entire exam, all of that stuff. And all the scores will sync back to Canvas automatically. So Canvas is just kind of recording the scores, but Gradescope is where you're going to see your feedback. Okay. All right. So those are some of the technical details that I wanted to go through. If you've got other questions, remember you can email me, you can post in the discussion forums, and we'll be talking a lot throughout the course. We'll be talking a lot throughout the course through email and through discussion forums. But on that note, let's talk about some big questions that you should be asking all the time. So as maybe nobody has told you this before, but these are some big questions that you really, really should be asking all the time in every one of your classes for the rest of your academic career and for the rest of your life, to be honest. Big questions. One, why am I learning this? Why should I care about this? Those are important questions. Perhaps in the past, you had teachers or instructors tell you that you shouldn't be asking that, or if you're still asking that question, you shouldn't be in this class. No, 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 no. That's not valid. You should always be asking, why am I learning this? Why should I care about this? What's the point of this? Because learning, and especially learning mathematics, is a really difficult process. And I can assure you that there are reasons that you're learning all of this stuff. It's not trivial, it's not pointless, it's not just because we thought it might be kind of fun. There are like a multitude of applications for everything that we're going to learn in this course. So there is definitely a reason why you're learning this stuff. Another big one is this. What is the intuition behind this concept? And this is something that I really want you to kind of take to heart, because whenever we learn anything in mathematics, there's an intuition behind it that kind of guides us. I'll talk about that on the next slide too, but you should always ask, what's the intuition? Make this make sense to me. Why doesn't this make sense? Does this make sense? There you go. And what's the intuition? Like, why should I expect this to be true? And then the other thing you should ask is this: where do I lose the feeling of understanding? So, this is something that's deeply personal to yourself. And every student of mathematics goes through this feeling, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. At some point, when you're learning mathematics, you get totally lost. That's normal, that's expected, there's nothing wrong with you. But at some point, you get totally lost, and you need to identify exactly when and where that feeling occurs. Because that's the point that we need to address. That's the point where we need to talk more about an idea or talk more about a concept to help it make more sense to you. Where do I lose the feeling of understanding? But I don't know when that is. You know when that is. You just have to feel comfortable enough to say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. That makes no sense. I have no idea what's going on. And I want you to do that. I want you to do that. We've all done this. Yeah, we all get very, very lost. So just let me know when you're lost, and then I can help you make sense of things. So, big questions to ask all the time. Don't forget those, and I'll reiterate them as we go along through the course. Now, some big ideas about math. So, I'll start with this quote. What does mathematical understanding even look like? One hallmark of mathematical understanding is the ability to justify, in a way appropriate to the student's mathematical maturity, why a particular mathematical statement is true or where a particular mathematical rule comes from. And that's actually from the Common Core State Standards Manual. And this is a really, really good measure for how well you understand something. And a lot of the times, I'm going to ask you why, or ask you to explain something, or to show where something comes from and explain why it makes sense. Um, that's really what mathematical understanding looks like. It's not the ability to get the right answer. It's not the ability to just grind through a bunch of calculations. That's not really authentic mathematical experience. Mathematical understanding. Mathematical understanding is being able to say, this is exactly why we're doing this way, and this is the reason we're doing it this way. This is why it looks the way it does when we do it this way. All of those things. That's mathematical understanding. How do you get to that point? Well, for one, you should demand intuition. You should always be demanding intuition. Why does this make sense? Make this make sense to me. Give me some intuition for this idea, so that way it'll click. Sometimes us mathematicians will call it an aha moment. It's a moment where you're just like, oh yeah, that's it. That totally clicks. And it's always a pleasure to help students get to that point, because once it clicks, it's almost like it couldn't be any other way. You feel that that's clearly the way things are, and it makes total sense, and you could explain it to others, you could explain it to yourself. That's what you're going for. So demand intuition. As goofy as this one sounds, you should appeal to counting if you can. A lot of the times we can simplify our calculations or simplify our ideas just by appealing to basic counting. If I've got this much of something and I've got this much of it again over here, then I've got this much of it all together. Those types of ideas. If you're a visual learner, always try to imagine a picture. And one of the nice things about trigonometry is there's lots of pretty pictures, lots of pretty pictures. But if you can, try to draw a picture, try to imagine a picture. Pictures help. Pictures always help. Try to draw them as long as you can until you get to a point where there isn't a picture to look at anymore. Then things get really wild. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about is this right here. There are two parts to mathematics. The first part is the ideas in our minds that we want to talk about with other people. And then the other part is the literal symbols that we write down to represent those ideas. Now, those two parts are disjoint and they're very different from one another. We have ideas that we want to talk about. There's deep ideas in your imagination, I'm sure, that you wish you could describe and talk about with other people. We can do that. How do we do it? Well, we create. We create symbols that we use to represent those ideas. So the symbols themselves don't have much meaning other than they're placeholders for ideas that we want to discuss. So every time you see a new mathematical symbol, you should ask yourself, what does this represent? And look at every single little piece. What does every piece of this symbol represent in the context of the idea that it represents? And one of the nice things about math is that we try to pick symbols that are very suggestive. We try to pick symbols that fit really well with what we're talking about and what we're trying to describe. But I'll say this, because there's these two parts, oftentimes students will be strong in one category but not the other. So maybe you found that you're really, really good at explaining these ideas, but you're not very comfortable manipulating the symbols, like doing algebra, you could say. But then there are some students that are actually really, really good at manipulating the symbols and like pushing symbols around and doing the algebra, but they really struggle to understand what the point of doing those calculations is. Well, if you don't have a balance, if you don't have both of those parts, you're missing half the picture. You're missing half the picture because, again, the point of math is there are these ideas that we want to describe to other people, to anybody, and we have symbols to describe them. So you want to draw the connection between the symbols and the ideas, and we'll talk about that more as the course goes on as well. Okay, so now we need to talk about the emotional component to doing math. So I don't know if any of your professors or any of your instructors in the past have had this conversation with you, but it's an important conversation that we're going to have right now. Math is not easy. It's not easy, and it involves a lot of frustration. There's a reason that not everybody does it. It can be very, very difficult at times, but what I want you to know is that that's a normal process, that it's normal to feel frustrated, it's normal to feel lost, it's normal to get angry about it. It's normal to just feel defeated or crushed by a math problem. One of the things I like to ask my classes is, has anybody, how many people have not cried over a math problem? And it's always an interesting response because I mean, I've cried over math problems many, many times in the past. Not always, but many, many times. So acknowledging your feelings about the process, acknowledging your feelings about mathematics, of learning and doing math, it's important and it's necessary. You have to recognize when you're getting just really upset over something. And the best bet or the best advice I can give is take a break, set it down for a little bit, come back, and you might find that suddenly everything makes sense. I've had that happen so many times where I've been working for hours and hours on a problem and I just can't seem to make sense of it. And then what do? I finally just go, and I put it down and then I go to bed and I'm just like grumpy about it. But then when I wake up the next morning and I look at the problem again, I realize, oh, that's what it is. That makes total sense. And it just kind of falls right out. So, uh, as weird as it might sound, learning how to cope with the emotions involved with doing math and is part of learning how to do math. So you have to learn how to cope with those emotions. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the mathematician Andrew Wiles. Um, but he's a famous mathematician because he solved Fermat's last conjecture, and it was a theorem that was unproven for over 200 years, and he solved it in the 90s. But he said this. He said to do math, people tend to believe that there's something you're born with, and either you have it or you don't. But that's not really the experience of mathematicians. We all find it difficult. It's not that we're any different from somebody who struggles with maths problems in the third grade. We're just prepared to handle that struggle on a much larger scale. We've built resistance to those setbacks. And speaking from my own personal experience, this is 100% true. Uh, I really hated math when I was a kid. Especially when I was in high school, I had didn't want anything to do with math. I hated math. I had no intention of going into math. But now I'm a mathematician and I got my PhD in mathematics. So it's definitely not something I was born with. My family is not into math. None of my family is a mathematician. But it's something that I fell in love with when I was older and I realized, hey, it's supposed to make sense. And once it makes sense, everything kind of clicks. So again, this is from, world famous mathematician here. We all find it difficult. We're no different from a third grader trying to learn how to do multiplication. We've just built up resistance to those setbacks. And I hope you will too. Okay, so now some important facts about math, some things that you need to know before we embark on this journey. One, there is no highest math class. There's no end to math classes. You just kind of decide when you want to stop going down the rabbit hole. A lot of students will ask me, like, what's the highest math class you know, or what's the highest math class you took, or what's the highest math you can do? The answer is there is none. There is none because there's no highest math class. You just start to learn more and more and more, and eventually you get to this point where you can describe a lot of things, more things. And it's not so much an upward trajectory as it is a broadening of the imagination and a broadening of the ability to describe things. That's really what it is. And you just decide personally yourself when you want to stop going down the rabbit hole because the rabbit hole goes forever. You just decide when you're done. You can go on forever if you want, so, for example, I have this picture of Alexander Grothendieck, the father of algebraic geometry, and you can see him when he was in college here, and then when he was a little bit older, then when he was an older man, and then when he was Gandalf. No, just kidding. But this the last picture is shortly before he died, but he was a mathematician for all of those years. What's the highest math he ever learned? Or ever knew, there isn't a highest class. You just keep going and going and generalizing and broadening your ideas. So that's one of the things that I love about math is that you can go on forever if you want, but you get to decide when you're done. Okay, so this is another important thing, and I always try to emphasize this to my classes. Math is designed to be understood by anyone and everyone. That is its entire purpose. Its purpose is for everybody to understand what we're talking about. That's why it's created, that's why we do it. And what I've experienced and what I always say is if something in mathematics doesn't make sense, it's usually because it's not being explained well enough. So that's why you need to demand intuition and you need to demand sense making because if something's not making sense, usually it's because somebody's not explaining it well enough. And you got to find someone else to explain it, or find another textbook, or find another article, or find another post where you can read a different perspective on the idea and it'll make sense. It's designed to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, then it's probably just not being explained well. The other thing I want to emphasize is this last paragraph here. So I am confident that every one of you can get to the point where you understand everything we learn in this course in an intuitive and meaningful way, where things will feel like they come naturally. Like I'm confident that you can do that. The catch is this. I'm not sure whether or not you have the resources to do it at this moment in time. That's the real uncertainty. And that's one of the difficult things about getting a college education. I know that you all can understand these ideas. I know you all can learn this math. But what I don't know is just how crazy life is going to get over the next 16 weeks. And life is notorious for throwing curveballs left and right, back to back curveballs. So I'm not sure if something is going to happen this semester. Usually stuff does, but I do know that you can understand it. So even if things don't work out this semester for you, I know that it will in the future. So don't give up. Don't give up. Sometimes life just gets in the way. Okay, so I'll be happy to elaborate on those things later if anybody has questions. But now what I want to do is finish by talking a little bit about solving problems. So how can a student approach a problem? There was a 1988 study conducted by some math education specialists, Judith and Larry Souter, with elementary school students, and they found that these students used the following 7 strategies. So Some students would find the numbers in the problem and just do something to them, usually addition. They would guess at the operation to be used, perhaps based on what has most recently been studied. Oh, we just learned this idea today, so maybe that's what I need to do on this problem. Three, sometimes they'll let the numbers tell them what to do. So one student said, if it's like 78 and maybe 54, then I'd probably either add or multiply. But if the numbers are 78 and 3, it looks like a division because of the size of the numbers, right? Number four, try all of the operations, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Try them all, and then choose the most reasonable answer once you've done all of that. Number five, look for key words to decide on which operation to use. So for example, if they see the word altogether, they think they should do addition, looking for key words, right? Six, narrow the choices based on the expected size of the answer. And then lastly, choose an operation or a relation based on making sense of the problem. All right, so here's one of those moments where I want you to kind of pause and I want you to reread these and just think about it for a minute. You can pause the video and we'll start up again in just a few seconds, but pause, think about these. Think about, which of these you have tried. Which have you tried in the past? Okay, so now that you've had a chance to think about it, I'm guessing that most of you were like, oh, I've done all of those. I've done all of those. And yeah, so have I. We've all done these things. We've all used these techniques to solve problems. So here's the interesting part. Only one of those methods actually involved understanding the problem itself. And that was number four, right? Choosing an operation or relation, or I'm sorry, number seven, based on making sense of the problem. That's the only one that involved actually understanding the problem. We've all used these methods before, but methods one through six involved some degree of trying to, quote, defeat the assessment. And it's difficult to describe what this type of mindset is, but it's a mindset shift. And I'll try to describe it now. The idea is that a student recognizes they are in a testing scenario or a testing situation, and rather than focusing on how to solve the problem that they're working on, they start focusing on the structure of the assessment itself. What is my teacher trying to ask? What does my teacher want me to say right now? What are they trying to get me to say? What did we just learn about today? Maybe they want me to repeat what they were just saying before the exam. Maybe there's some hint that I'm supposed to get that will give me the answer to this question. But asking yourself those questions, that very mindset is the inauthentic thinking that you want to avoid because that's not making sense of the problem and answering the problem. That's recognizing that you're being tested and trying to defeat the test. The problem with that type of mindset is that it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work very well. And your best bet is to make deep sense and gain intuition about the problems as we go along, because then the answers just kind of fall right out. It's a really fascinating thing once it happens. So it's well, okay, like I'll give you an example that I notice in my calculus classes. So in my calculus classes, Calc 2 in particular, we have to find the centroid of a region, something you'll do in Calc 2. And oftentimes I'll use a semicircle as an example. A semicircle is just half a circle, right? And we'll find the centroid of that region, which is basically the center of mass. Now, when I put a question like this on the exam, I won't use a semicircle. I'll use something like a parabola, right? So something like a parabola. Okay, I'll even draw the picture and I'll even emphasize that it's a parabola. I'll box the word parabola and I'll make it bold and I'll say this is a parabolic region. Find its centroid. And what's surprising is that I would say about half of my students will think that it's a circle. And they'll go through the exact same process that we did for the semicircle in the example in class. Well, that's because they're doing this, right? They are guessing at the operation to be used, perhaps based on what's most recently been studied. That's defeating the assessment. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You want to make sense of the problem. See that you're working with a parabolic region and think about the equation of a parabola and so on and so on. So don't try to beat me. Don't try to beat the test giver. Just make sense of the problems, and then the answers will fall out. Um, yeah, so I say it right here. The methods that I was just describing, they involve a student inadvertently restructuring their problem-solving attempt to one that sees the assessment itself as the problem to be solved instead of the question being asked. And those techniques on the previous slide, they're antithetical to the goal of education because they don't result in authentic learning. And that's what you want. You want authentic learning. Being able to get the right answer doesn't mean that you can understand what's going on. And these days, as weird as it sounds, well, I mean, I'll say this a lot, but we have computers to give us these answers. So when we ask you to compute something or like solve a problem, it's not so much that we're looking for the actual final answer because we already know the final answer. There's a computer that can tell us immediately. What we're looking for is, can you explain that problem? Can you explain how to get the answer? That's what we don't know, and that's what we're looking for with our assessments. Okay, all right, so that's it for this lecture. This is just a little bit of an introduction. If you've got questions, you can post them on the discussion forum in Canvas. There's a general course forum on there, sorry, a general course questions forum on there. There's also a week one discussion, one about just introducing ourselves, and then one for talking about the content that we're going to learn in the next lectures. All right, so that's it for today. And I'll see you around next time, and I look forward to talking to you on Canvas. Oh, I got to cue some things up here. All right, have a good one, everyone.